dalam berbilion penduduk dunia yang ada di kalangan kita yang tidak pun ada hak, tidak ada kewarganegaraan, tidak ada pembelaan, tidak ada juga mereka yang begitu simpati hingga dapat mengubah nasib masyarakat ini. Dan mereka lah orang-orang Rohingya yang masih menderita kerana kita, masyarakat antarabangsa, masih lagi tidak melakukan secukupnya untuk memastikan nasib mereka berubah. Oleh itu saya ingin meminta izin berbicara dalam bahasa Inggeris. I would like to welcome my two guests for today. On the furthest away from me is Dr. Maung Zarni. He's been a fellow at LRC and stuff, but he's also a fellow at University Malaya. Thank you so much for gracing Malaysia so that we can have more perspective on this very important issue. And then I have Saiful Haq. Photo activist, I like that term that you put in on your online presence. So you've been around capturing what you do best, photos of the sufferings and the plight of the Rohingyas. But for the benefit of the general audience in Malaysia, where I'm pitching this discussion tonight, I'd like to go 2 steps back maybe and look at how we frame this crisis and issue. Because a lot of people have a lot of perception of what this issue really is. Maybe a few years ago, it's hidden underneath the whole big issue called Myanmar and the opening up of Myanmar, all these other names now being mentioned. But as we see billions of US dollars going into Myanmar, even as we speak, how can it be that one of the most pressing problem and crisis in the 20th century is still existing in the 21st century, opening up of Myanmar as we know it? So I would like to give the opportunity to Dr. Zarni first to frame it, because even President Barack Obama might not have termed it correctly, and this is something to be really looked at, because if America, for all its economic sanction and pressures on Myanmar, missed this opportunity to frame it correctly, then this is the elephant in the room that we must not repeat again.
Well, firstly, what is happening to the Rohingya people did not begin yesterday, or begin as a result of the opening up. Okay. You know, the framing of the sufferings and the mass violence directed against the Rohingya as part and parcel of this great democratic opening. You know, coming even from a country like Indonesia, Indonesian foreign minister, as well as, you know, international crisis group, they frame this as part of the opening up. Yugoslavia, when you open up a country, it's a tinderbox, you know, it just like, you know, blow up in your face. That's factually wrong, because the directed and targeted attacks of Rohingyas were, first of all, initiated by the very state that is in control, or that has been in control, in the hands of the military since 1962. And the first large wave of Rohingya persecution that took the form of anti-immigration crackdown took place in February 1978. If you go far back to 1978-79, you know, both academic and popular journals, such as Far Eastern Economic Review, now defunct, or like Asian Survey from the University of California at Berkeley, they used the term in 1978 and 79, Burma's apartheid. And now apartheid, over the past 3 years, have, you know, developed into a essentially fully fledged genocide. We call this the slow burning genocide of the Rohingya for 35 years. If you look at, say, I mean, this is not a hyperbole. This is not a push from activist perspective. If you look at the Rome Statute that came into effect in July 2002, Article 6 of the Rome Statute is about genocide. And of the 5 genocidal acts, 4 are being committed by the Burmese state. And finally, this issue has been framed as religious / communal conflict between the Rohingya Muslims and Rakhine Buddhists. But these are two groups that have lived together in spite of some, occasional flare-up peacefully. Yeah. So I think to frame this as a Muslim-Buddhist issue is to really miss the point. The point is the Burmese state is anti-Islam as a matter of policy, as a matter of its thinking and mindset. And the state is the main culprit. The Rakhine Buddhists are local proxies. So the issue is about the genocide of the Rohingya.
Systematic genocide by a state.
Systematic genocide, the population, the attempt to control and prevent the population through restrictions on marriage and birth. That is a genocidal act. And inflicting conditions of life for the Rohingya that as such that Rohingyas would rather die fleeing the country at sea or over land than staying there.
Doctor, I'll come back to that. I'm just going, before we go to the first break, giving a chance to Saiful. If it's that serious, why is the international community still are not very well aware of what's happening? And you put the word underreported in your online articles.
First of all, I think Burma was a closed country until very recently. And this is a community which has been persecuted since 1977. Some would probably say 1948. So from then on, they did not have education, they did not have access to health and everything. So they failed to promote their own issues because there are people who are not educated enough. So after this opening up, suddenly things like came to knowledge of the world because of the June violence, 2012. And from then on, people gets to know. And only then people started knowing that, as he just mentioned, that it didn't happen yesterday. And I think when you ask why it is so that we don't even know when UN even says that this is the most persecuted community in the world, it is because of the fact the people who controls the power, even the people who are behind the UN and controlling the agenda, don't want to present Burma as such, the way that the state is doing such things to its own people.
Saiful, I'm going to ask you after this first break to come back and maybe pick one photo that you remember very much to represent the suffering of the Rohingyas. And from then on, I would like to borrow your early experience, being in the enclosure of the university, having a father. Activism is very much in line with your DNA. So we can't hope for the state alone to change by its own inertia.
Of course.
But this problem, the Rohingya, has spread out across neighboring countries, for example. So maybe collectively, countries surrounding or near to Burma or Myanmar must do more to help. So we'll discuss that after this short break. Terima kasih kerana masih menonton Agenda Awani yang masih membicarakan tentang derita masyarakat Rohingya. Tragedi ini tidak boleh dibiarkan berterusan. Apa yang mampu kita lakukan? Pertamanya ialah untuk betul-betul memahami isu ini. Saya ingin terus berbicara bahasa Inggeris dengan kedua tamu saya. I would like to go straight to Saiful now, and if you can pick one, because I'm a journalist but I'm not a good photojournalist, but if I can imagine when you frame a shot, everything would be composed into it. It will tell millions of stories just from one frame of photo. So if you can pick one to share with us, because I want for you to share that deep intensity of this tragedy and crisis.
It's very difficult because, for photographers, their photographs are their children. And the reason I take pictures is not because I like the photograph or the situation, but I just want to say few things, or as you said, millions of things. So it's a the whole story tells one story. But still, if you want me to pick one photograph, I would like to pick the photograph of that man standing alone by the side of the river Naf.
Okay.
His name is Abul Kalam. He's a friend of mine. He's a Rohingya, and he's a colleague. We have been working together for 5 years since I started working on this issue. So it was a long day. We photographed the whole day in the camp, and I was personally very tired. At one point, he said, "Let's have a walk by the river. It is very peaceful there." We went down, as you could see from the photograph, and suddenly I was like 20 feet below him, much closer to the river, and suddenly he pointed towards the horizon. Actually, he was standing on the river bank, Naf, and on the other side, very near to where we are standing, is Burma.
Mm-hmm.
He pointed towards that and asked me, "Can you see what's on the other side?" I said, "Yeah, of course, I can see it. It's not that far." And then I said, "Maybe it's just 2 kilometers.
Mm-hmm.
And then he said something that really framed it for me. He said, "For you, it's just 2 kilometers. For me, it's 2 million miles.
Mm-hmm.
For you, you could cross and go there. For me, it is a place which I will never be able to visit. I can even see my home from there, where my mother is there, my family is there. But this river is so big for me that I will never be able to cross it." I think that moment I realized the feeling of this young man who hasn't seen his family, parents, sisters for ages. He came to Bangladesh when he was 8-9 years old, alone with distant relatives. And since then, he went back once, and just because he went to see his mother, Nasaka got to know. And his family was in deep trouble. His mother was almost beaten to death. His father was very badly beaten and tortured. So that moment, I mean, I can speak for hours about my photographs, but that moment freezed everything, and I felt, the whole idea of borders, the distance, it's so vague.
Yeah.
It is never about how many feet, how many million miles. It's about the freedom that you have.
Yes.
So that's the photograph.
Doctor, everywhere around the world, if you look at Africa, the post-colonial period, the nation-state borders were just framed, notwithstanding the plight of the people, fragmentizing societies, wherever. Like it or not, we have inherited this problem as a fellow Southeast Asian country, for example. So how do you think the countries closest to this issue can do more? It's not just applied from an NGO like thinking, asking for things to be done, but really concrete steps that civil society now, with the advent of internet, social media and others, that we can really rally and galvanize to solve this issue once and for all.
Well, first of all, the Rohingya issue is in part framed as the issue of stateless people.
Okay.
In this day and age, of say about 200 nation states strung together around the United Nations.
Yes.
The greatest tragedy is that it is not enough to be human beings. You have to have a legal state that recognizes you as a member of that state. And so because the Rohingyas who were born in the country lived there for generations, some would even say centuries. It's not just simply an ethnic, pure ethnic group. It has
roots,
roots in there. It intermarry with local Rakhines. Converted to Buddhism. Some Rakhines converted to Islam. The problem of Rohingya is in part problem of the very nation state, that both the idea and its operation. And so as such, the Rohingya problem, yes, was created and is maintained by the Burmese state, but the neighboring states and ultimately the international system of nation states are, culpable. In other words, when you have neighboring countries that go and do business business as usual with the Burmese government, that is the main perpetrator of Rohingya
Okay.
suffering.
All right.
Then,
Okay.
like, you know, they are actually, if we look at genocide as massive murder and destruction of a particular group,
Yes.
then you have accomplices in all crimes, even a car theft in Kuala Lumpur. You cannot do this one alone. You have at least a few people. And so we have to look at the guy who got in the car and turned the ignition and drive away to the guy who do the lookout. And so we've got like
Done.
other nation states that are
Yes.
culpable
Okay.
in this
I
situation.
have to go for the last break, but once we are back, the question is now, without changing the policies, the action of the government of Burma or Myanmar, nothing will change. It will stay as it is.
No, you will supply the Rohingyas with a few bags of rice, some kilos of medicine,
But
and
they'll get killed tomorrow.
yes,
At any time.
yes. In that scenario, being pragmatic and not willing to confront the Burmese
The real
government
issue.
because you are doing
Okay.
millions of dollars worth
Fine.
of business,
Doctor,
that will not
I have
work.
to go for the break, but how do you confront a government in the 21st century? That will be the discussion after this. Jadi apa yang akan terjadi kepada masyarakat Rohingya? Mereka tidak diiktiraf oleh negara mereka sendiri. Jika kerajaan mereka sendiri tidak berubah, orang luar susah untuk berubah kerana walaupun di kurun ke-21, jika anda bukan warga negara mana-mana negara bangsa, maka anda tidak ada hak. Itu persoalan pokoknya. Oleh itu saya ingin meneruskan perbincangan dalam bahasa Inggeris. I was just saying to the audience, if you're not a member of any nation state, then you pretty much doomed even in the 21st century. So let's go back to the nation state, go back to Burma, Myanmar, and if you cannot force them to change, like I think we've passed that bridge with the economic ties now going stronger and stronger with other countries around the world. How do we use these economic ties as the single greatest motivator for the state now to change how they deal with the Rohingyas?
Well, firstly, we have this concept of the so-called international community. And the international community has to look at the facts on the ground and come to a consensus that this is crimes against humanity, this is ethnic cleansing, this is genocide. Look at all the international criminal laws, every single one, including the most severe crimes, genocidal crimes, have been committed by the very member of ASEAN, and who is actually this year the chair of the ASEAN. The chair of the ASEAN in 2014 is the main perpetrator of genocidal crime against 1.3 million Rohingya people, out of whom only 40,000 have legal status. And so, 9 other members of the ASEAN, to start with, have to put the facts on the ground, put the analysis that is backed by empirical data and confront the regime. Look, this is not about defaming or slandering you as our co-member, but this is not just an internal affair.
But does ASEAN, since the very beginning, has the ability and mechanism to deal with this kind of issue? Because even from the beginning, it's always been zone of peace, freedom, neutrality, but I don't get to go into the other members' country and interfere. The word fear very, very much.
Well, I think like, you said earlier, we live in a highly integrated, commercially, culturally, economically, ideologically integrated basically global society.
Yes.
Yeah. Look at. We are Southeast Asia.
Yes.
This is not our national dress. That's not your national dress. We speak English language. It's not possible to live in a cocoon of like a national isolation. Yeah. But even in our lives, if your neighbor is an alcoholic, beating up the wife, attempting to rape his own daughter, or throwing bottles at passers-by, then what would you do? You would, try to report that person to the local authorities. And failing there, you will get a few neighbors together to overpower and stop that kind of destructive, rapist, murderers, or violent behavior. That's what exactly ASEAN need to do. I think the ASEAN's, the principle of non-interference is bogus, absolutely bogus. In this globalized world, when we see things, horrible things being done to communities and individuals and countries, we have to stand up. That is what we were taught as children in school and universities.
And by all the treaties that have been signed internationally. Saiful, we can talk about state, grouping of state until the cow come home, but I believe in the power of social media. The Arab Spring has shown that, yes, it's messy, but it has its own ways of doing things. You've started, for example, the Kickstarter to generate fund for the Rohingya plight. So maybe it's innovative, creative, new ways like that. Not just waiting for bureaucrats representing countries to settle stuff, but using the power of the people.
Yeah, sure. Before going to that, I would like to add to Zani's point that I think it's no more an internal issue. It's a global problem. I think the basic problem with looking at the issue is people tend to think it's an issue with Burma, but it's a problem for Bangladesh, the country I come from. It's an issue for Malaysia. It's a we all know how Australia has formed this new law. It's an issue for Thailand. It's an issue for all those countries in the Middle East. So it's not intervening into someone's personal one state, right? So that's the first thing. And I think since I started working, I can give you that. I can share one experience. Since I started showing my work in Bangladesh, this body of work has been shown around the world. But when I showed it to Bangladesh, I have seen so much empathy on people's eyes, because they come to me and say, "Is it true? Does it really happen to the Rohingyas? Oh, I'm really sorry." And that moment I felt that they don't act because they don't know. So the first thing first is to let people know how they're suffering around the world. That of course includes my own country, Bangladesh, but mostly in Burma, because the global media doesn't want the world to know that this is happening, because they are also excited about the honeymoon they're going to have with Burma when it comes to oil, minerals, and all the financial and corporate interests. So they want to hide it, but sorry to use the word, but thanks to the June violence, they couldn't anymore hide it. Because the world knew, of course, the people like us knew that something bad is happening, and we got to know. So I think it's all about finding ways to make the general people involved and make people concerned about the situation. And the more people knows, the more people raise their voice, I think there is a chance that this corresponding states would act.
And you're seeing that online, that the awareness, the empathy is growing.
Yes, I have seen. First of all, it's an issue. I'm not talking about Iraq war. I'm not talking about the refugees from Afghanistan. I'm not talking about the drone attacks in Pakistan. I'm talking about an issue which people didn't even know that there is a group called Rohingyas, and there is this country, and where people are going through this for 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. So I've seen this growing, and wherever I go, people just not thank me because of the work that we are doing, but thank me because of the fact that they finally know, okay, something so bad has happened, and it's growing, of course, and thanks to all the partners I've been working with, they have showing this work.
Okay, thank you so much to Dr. Maung Zarni and Saiful for making the point. I wish we could have more points to be discussed, but I'm sure we can somehow, across the internet or otherwise, keep in touch and keep propagating the real facts and truth about what's happening in Burma or Myanmar as we see it now. Thanks to you for watching. Hantarkan pandangan anda sendiri kepada Astro Awani dengan pelbagai platform yang ada, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, pun terus muat turun aplikasi mudah alih Astro Awani di iOS dan juga Android, dan insyaAllah kita jumpa lagi dalam episod Agenda Awani yang lain pula. Selamat malam dan terima kasih. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.